Just a few facts that we'll go through first and statistics. So the first one is to do with lower limb injuries, that they account for nearly 80% of all injuries recorded in football and 70% of all injuries recorded in hurling. Now, most injuries in Gaelic games are non-contact injuries. Only 28% of injuries were reported as having occurred following contact with another player in football. That figure is a little bit higher. It's at 36% when it comes to hurling. And then recurrent cases accounted for 24% of all injuries in football, a lower 19% in hurling. I'm just visiting this, and in terms of research, Ger, what went into compiling this database of statistics?
These figures are based on the GAA injury database, which is run in conjunction with the GAA and UCD, the School of Physiotherapy and Medicine there. And that's been running since 2006. And inter-county squads in hurling and football, their physios provide information on the injury status of their players. The data is anonymised, so there's no information going out in terms of medical information about people. There's no information going to other squads, but it's a very important database because we've been able to use the data from that to drive initiatives to prevent injury and to minimise the risk of injury, to drive return to play, best practice and so on. And one of the key things we've done, which we're going to talk about now, is introduce the GAA 15 warm-up based on the evidence and information we got from the injury database.
Yeah, I suppose it is to do with preventative measures, and Edwina, you were pivotal in establishing this GAA 15. Do you want to take us through it a little bit?
Yeah, so the GAA 15, first of all, is a warm-up. It takes 15 minutes to complete at the start of training, and it doesn't. You don't need any equipment to do it, to complete it. So it's evidence-based. We took on in UCD a systematic review of the international best practice, or the guidelines that other sports have used in elite and junior and amateur level sport. And we wanted to make sure that, I suppose, a lot of experts came in on designing the actual programme itself. So the elements of the GAA 15 warm-up start to obviously warm up the player, but they also take into activating the right muscles to complete the different movements involved in the GAA, and then initiate and potentiate kind of jumping abilities. And I suppose the idea behind it is to influence the biomechanics of the player, so that they're completing these landing, jumping, quick multi-directional activities at high speed in the most efficient way and the most safest way for their muscles and for their joints. And the idea behind that then is to make sure that we're boosting their welfare going into the future. So the important thing about the GAA 15 is getting it implemented now among the teams, especially at the grassroots level, so that children are learning this intervention warm-up. They know the importance of it, and they bring that as they advance through the ranks, and then it becomes practice. It becomes every day to them. And in that way, coaches, I suppose, and everyone here has a role in bringing this type of intervention or prevention or prehabilitation for injuries to their teams now, and encouraging the whole idea of movement and I suppose efficiency in the activities that they undertake in the game. And it's a really simple way of kind of preventing injuries and improving the biomechanics and the performance of the player and improving their welfare for the future.
Yeah, and I think we can actually take a look at that. There's a video here.
Good job, fellas. Let's get into our position. We're working into our squat technique. Let's do it. Remember our technique, boys. Shoulders back, chest forward, head up. Let's walk into a lunge, forward lunge. Trunk rotation when you get comfortable with the technique. So a straight lunge, get your technique, progress to rotations. That's good. Let's change that around. Reverse lunge. This time let's bring that shoulder action in. Let's bring that straight extended elbow action in. So no bent arms, straight above the head. That's good. All right, let's just get that arc shape for our floor work, boys. We'll recover on the ground. We get our stretching and strengthening in. The bridge drop. So let's hold for 5 initially. Keep that knee bent, pointing up towards the sky. We're going straight into our plank. Maintain that plank position. Now remember, keep that alignment correct. Shoulder, hip, knee, ankle. Okay, side plank. Get comfortable with the position.
Cian, I suppose we'll go to yourself off the back of that. Do you want to tell us your involvement in this? And one of the questions that I have is about how you would implement this at a club level as well. Obviously, you've been doing it at the highest level, but at a more grassroots level, how do you go about implementing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the purpose of my involvement there, the warm-up was already set out very carefully by the committee. It was really to show how it can be integrated in terms of dovetailing the coaching side of things with the actual physical preparation, which wouldn't be quite evident from that. That was edited just to show you the actual exercises. For me, the most important thing, particularly from a games perspective, is that you need to integrate the fundamental skills, the fundamental movement patterns, with these warm-up exercises as well. So if you look at this online on the GAA website, you'll see how that happens. You wouldn't have seen it there. Because no player wants to spend 15 minutes pre-exercise, during exercise, post-exercise, just doing things like planks, lunges, and so on and so forth. So everything you're seeing there is integrated with striking, lifting, roll lift, jab lift, short strike, hand pass, high fielding, blocking, that type of thing. So really my involvement was to integrate that from a football and from a hurling perspective. And it can be done in 15 minutes, and the purpose of that was to show that with a little bit of advanced preparation and planning, you actually will tick all the boxes, for want of a better term, with everything that Adrina and her team came up with, in addition to covering the fundamental skills. Because once the warm-up ends and the session starts proper, they need to be ready to get straight into action in terms of the game, the importance of the skills, the tactical development aspects. And you won't get that by just doing 10 minutes of physical exercises. So that really was the core rationale behind my involvement there.
In terms then, Edwina, of when it comes, because this is all applicable to injury management and returning to play, what are the best ways to treat injuries and then the return to play protocols in that end?
I guess what we found from the injury surveillance database, if you even look at the recurrence rate of injuries, it's increasingly common for people to return to sport and then re-injure the same area again. So 1 in 4 injuries, I think, are recurrent. That comes out from the database this year. So that's kind of worrying in a case that us as physios and as the medical team and maybe the coaches and the management as well, we need to ensure that the player is fully ready and rehabilitated before they return to sport. And that's not alone important in the short term for their, I suppose, health and getting back and getting a good run at the game and getting the most out of your players as a team, I guess. But it's also important in the long-term health of a player, because we know also that some injuries that occur early in someone's life have consequences later in life, such as, I guess, if you look at ACL injuries or something like that, we know that that's directly related to some OA changes of the knee later on in life. So we have to be quite careful with our players, with our management and our coaches, that we all know how important it is to be fully ready and rehabilitated before we return to sport and give the player the best chance of developing, I suppose, their potential or living their potential in the game.
Would some of those figures have surprised you, Liam?
Sorry?
Would some of those figures have surprised you?
Yeah, look, I done a small bit with a club team last year, and I was absolutely completely taken aback with the amount of players that weren't available to train. I mean, we ragged them, and there was up to 12 of them that weren't able to train to their full potential because of niggling injuries. And I just found that stat completely off the Richter scale, to be honest with you. And, when I was involved with Tipperary, I probably learnt a lot in my first year. In terms of when the second year came, John Casey said, Liam, the first thing we have to do here with this panel is prehab. So John screens every one of the players at the start of the season before we get into the training, and he already has tweaked where they might have challenges or where there's small little niggling injuries. He prehabs them and he gives them a programme that they could run for 6 weeks before we get into the real physical training, when this bio here takes over and he starts putting them through the physical barrier. But I think that's really important, that every player, the most frustrating thing for a player is to know that he's going to training and he can't actually train 100%. So there's an absolute responsibility to make sure that you try and intervene early, get the player, because, as I said, whatever about the effort they have to put into training, if they can't go 100%, it really does hold them back, and it affects them mentally and everything. And as I said, 1 in 4 having recurring injuries. So this is something that, with the right preparation and with the right expertise, can absolutely be addressed, and it'll make a huge difference to actually not just the performance of the player, but the overall enjoyment that he receives, because he'll be able to train and do everything to the maximum.
Just following on from that, myself and Liam had this discussion beforehand. I think it's very important I'm sure most of us here are involved with clubs as much as any other involvement. The key thing is that these resources that are put up by the GAA, it's not for elite athletes or for elite teams. They're designed by Edwin and their group for every single player from, well, in some cases some of the exercises may be advanced for children, but from an adult perspective, it's really for everyone. And clubs, for me, are the real core area that need to start focusing on these protocols, because I guess speaking from an inter-county perspective, our concern when players are released back to clubs, it's not the match itself. It's perhaps sometimes the lack of preparation, be it physical, mental, whatever, that they're so used to doing at inter-county level, is not ran at club level. And I mean the simple things, not the more complex things. Some clubs now are as advanced, in some cases more advanced in inter-county teams, and they're the leaders in the field for me at club level. But there's no reason when you have resources like this that you can't be as prepared and as focused in terms of looking after your players. And that's not just the inter-county players returning, it's every single player in your club. So the resources are there. We're just trying to advocate for clubs and for players and for coaches and for trainers to use them to the best of their ability.
I might just get your thoughts on this very quickly, Ross, because you're coming back from, or you are back from a pretty bad injury at the moment in your back. Do you want to go through like some of the coming back to full tilt, I guess, on the training pitch over the winter time?
Yeah, I suppose I played with an injury for most of last year, and it can be a very tough place to be where you're trying to perform at a certain level and know that your body isn't at that stage. But for me, the big part on that was, we had a new manager this year with Laois, Mick Lillis, and being able to go to Mick and saying, listen, I've had a problem for the last while, I need a little bit of help with it, and I need time to rehab it, and that's going to require time away from training with the group. And it's probably something that's going to feed into the next part of the conversation, or the next part of the forum here, in terms of, having that relationship with a manager and the backroom team, that it's okay to go and say, listen, I don't feel like I'm at the level that you need me to be at the minute, and the best thing for me is to take a bit of a break at the moment. Because I suppose at club level, sometimes you have a situation where the manager of a team wants something. He or she may not be directly involved in recruiting the physio for the club, and a player goes in to see the physio. He or she tells them, listen, you can't train today, and the player goes out to try and tell the manager. Really, I suppose at club level especially, that decision should always be taken away from the player. That it's, again, you're trusting in the management team that you have at the club, that the manager's role is also to liaise with the physio and them to tell you, tonight is too soon for you, we're going to get you to do a bit upstairs in the gym and you'll be back on the field on Thursday. So I think the communication part of it is huge. I know certainly looking at the GAA 15, inter-county teams, as Keane has said, you integrate bits and pieces of this throughout your session, and it might be, you see the planks and bits and pieces like that, you might end up doing that after some of your runs. So you don't necessarily have to stick to every single part of it, and players don't want to know the science behind it. They just want to know that after the warm-up, am I in a position where I can go full belt now at the start of the tough part of the session? And I think that's where, again, the physio and the manager, even at club level, that they understand it and that they know, the manager knows, okay, if I want them to get from A to B 20 minutes into the session, then what do we need to do with the players that will put them in a position to do that, and take all that away from the players.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in the context of your relationship with coaches in this next section.